condos, but the idea is that people are accessing the downtown, and that's exactly what we want. So we really put Des Moines on the map, and it's been hugely successful, and so we will prepare a report for you with recommendations for the future. But at any rate, yeah. Then the other thing of note that's occurring relative to the marina is this Tuesday at 5 p.m. at the Activity Center, we're planning on having a 2-hour open house, kind of a community, what we're calling community check-in. It's been a couple of years with COVID. Here's where we are with the marina. Here are the things we're working on. We'll have 6 stations, different aspects of marina redevelopment, manned by different members of our staff and or consultants. We plan on having kind of an open house from 5 to 6. People can view the stations, ask questions, meet with staff, whatever. We'll have boards, and also we have boards from previous community open houses where we've asked for public input. Now we can reflect how we've listened to that input, and this is kind of some next steps that we're looking at taking. And then at 6, we're going to have the mayor do a brief presentation on sort of state of the city, the marina in context, and then we're going to have our architect, Jeff Koval from Skylab, come and do an additional presentation, a little more drilled down in terms of design and development patterns and all of that. And then we'll have, after those 2 presentations, there'll be another 30, 40 minutes. People can look at the stations. We'll have in that alcove a couple of boards with questions for the community to respond to and to put dots wherever they want. We'll also have a handout for them with a link where they can, if they don't want to write down comments or participate in that night, they can email the city clerk with any comments, and we'll compile those and utilize those. So then at some point, we'll bring the results of that discussion to city council as we kind of update with where we are in the marina and what our next steps are. So we're excited about that. It's a good chance to kind of check in. We did massive workshops in 2017 on the Argosy boat, 2019 at the Yacht Club, and now it's almost 3 years, unbelievably enough, since we did the last one. And so it's just a good chance to kind of check in, and here's where we are. So, Mr. Chair, I believe that's kind of what comprises my update. Oh, please, sorry. That's why you reminded me right before the meeting. Thanks. Yeah.
I just wanted to close this out with updating the committee. So in June we met and we talked about the quarter-deck lease extension. And at that time we were discussing doing an extension with Ken Rogers, and then potentially an assignment once he sells the business. Rather than do that, we've kind of taken a new track where we've been working with McKinsey, who is here, right here. So she's going to be purchasing the business, and rather than extending with Ken and then assigning to her, we've just been negotiating a new lease with her. So essentially, she would be aware of what the city's expectations are. We'd sign the lease with her and then terminate the lease with Ken once they finish their business deal. So we had talked about some terms at our last committee meeting. What staff will be proposing is a 5-year lease with a 5-year extension. We're looking at keeping the rent at essentially the same amount as is currently being paid. There is a CPI annual adjustment, so it's up significantly from where it was at the beginning, and it'll keep rising. But that's inflation. And we need to update the premises map on the lease. But for the most part, what we're proposing is an identical lease to what Ken has. There are some performance standards in there, and that would be tied into any extension, is that those performance standards are met. So we're also going to be briefing the next committee tonight on that and talking about the lease, and then with your approval and with their approval, we'll bring this forward to the council probably in October.
Okay. No comments from my colleagues. Sorry, any comments from my colleagues?
Well, I would just say thank you for finding the most efficient way to make that happen for our business or our folks down there.
Yeah. As well, and then obviously, if it's gonna come back to council, and we're talking about it now in municipal facilities, it's commendable to both parties. Okay. Those are my comments.
Thanks. Just one quick comment, and that is, and this had come up earlier when we talked about this, you know, the value of the quarter deck as an example of what can be accomplished and can occur on the marina floor, we feel easily values the lease at a relatively low rate because it's such a benefit. People get off the passenger ferry service, the developers all love to see it, everybody loves to see that facility functioning as an example of what can occur on the marina floor. So I think that's one reason we thought, you know, when you're running a business, you know, a few $100s on the lease for the city may or may not have significant value. That few $100s for the business can have significant value. So we'd like to continue to be able to provide sort of the public value support to the quarter deck. And I knew that had come up before. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, guys. Moving on to the Housing Action Plan.
Great. Good evening, Chair and other council members or committee members. Denise Lathrop, Community Development Director. I just was going to give a brief update of where we're at in our Housing Action Plan. We had a couple of initial deliverables as part of our grant. The first was a public participation plan, and the second one is a draft housing needs assessment. So the public participation plan, we have a couple of things planned that will provide input into the housing action plan. So we'll be having some informal community conversations. We had a little slippage of the schedule due to staffing impacts on both our side as well as our consultant's side. So we're playing a little bit of catch up. So we're going to be tag teaming with some of the Parks and Rec events this fall. They have some soccer games at the Field House in Midway Park, and that will give us an opportunity to have conversations or have information available and question and answers with community members. So there'll be families at those events. We also have a couple of more formal open houses. We're going to plan one for later this fall and one in winter of 2023. So the intent of the fall one will be to share the housing needs assessment information with the community so people are at an understanding of where our needs lie. And then in the winter of 2023, we'll be starting to talk about housing policy and that. Another piece of our community outreach is we're going to have stakeholder group discussions and interviews. And so we've identified a number of stakeholders that include people who provide affordable housing developers. We have community resource agencies such as CMAR and HealthPoint and those that are on the group of stakeholders. Once we the consultants are doing some additional fine tuning to that plan, but once it's available, we'll post it on the, when we upload the project webpage information, so then that will be available for people to look at. We also plan for council check-ins. We're sort of thinking quarterly check-ins to discuss key findings and draft work products, as well as when we get into policy discussions, we'll want to chat with council about that. A lot of this information is also going to be feeding into the housing element of the comprehensive plan, which I'll be talking about after this briefing. And so, you know, there'll be more opportunities to have a bite at the apple, but that's sort of where we're at. And then we will have a public hearing in May and June. We'll have a first and second reading of the draft housing action plan. So then that will be another opportunity to discuss this. And as we meet with the council, I'm sort of envisioning at least meeting with this committee, and then we can talk about on some really more important items that maybe bring those forward as the council study session where the full council can discuss along the way. And then regarding the housing needs assessment, it's a draft housing needs assessment, so that's the initial deliverable that we'll have to Commerce. And that just provides some of the quantitative data and analysis to understand our local housing needs. And it will serve as the foundation for policy recommendations and then coming up with implementable strategies is, you know, things that you can really carry forward. It's not sort of pie in the sky. And then that document has, you know, right now what was provided to us, we have some demographic and housing trends, and so I thought I would just sort of walk through some of those initial findings. Obviously, our city, I know the first 10 years that I worked here, we barely had any growth, and so we've actually started to experience some moderate population growth, and that has been more with older and younger adults. So, and then our city has become more racially diverse. We've gained more wealthy residents while losing low to moderate income residents. And then our economy is starting to diversify, which I expect is the result of the business part and the new jobs that have been created there. In terms of housing trends, we're still predominantly a single-family residential community, but we've been seeing more multifamily development continue to be built in our city. Housing costs have risen. They provided some statistics. They've increased 412,000 or 239% between 2012 and 2022, yet the incomes haven't kept pace with the housing costs. And so you have and that bodes true with rental costs within our city. So what the initial findings is that for our city that we have a pretty big housing need for providing housing for people with incomes of 80% of the area median income or less. And so area median income is also sometimes referred to as median family income, or, you know, sort of the median or middle of a household income, given the larger region. And so one of the things that will come out of this work is, you know, for Commerce, the new legislation, instead of encourage affordable housing that's affordable to all income segments, it's accommodate. And so we have to think about, you know, moving forward, how are we going to accommodate housing that's going to meet the need of the 0 to 30% area median income, and then it's bracketed 30 to 50, 50 to 80, 80 to 120, and then over 120. And so, you know, we're working, they've given us some initial guidance on that. One of the things with our comp plan update, we're going to be planning out to 2044. And so we've been given a housing target of 3,800 housing units. And so what will come out of this is it will break down of those housing units, where is the need within those different income brackets. And then, go ahead.
No, sorry, just to interrupt. Apologize. That those housing targets, it's interesting, but I think those come also from like Vision 2050. And some of that's associated with designation with Sound Transit in Des Moines as a transit-oriented designation for our city, which increases your housing requirements, and they want transit-oriented development. Even though the station's located in Kent, but the regional around that, sort of the immediate regional and then going further out, is a function of that designation.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, the next steps, you know, once during the, and this I discussed before, but we'll be reviewing housing policies and regulations sort of during that winter, spring timeframe. And then we'll also be talking about strategies to meet our housing needs, whether it's zoning or process improvements or incentives. And some of the housing, it's going to be really challenging because that 0 to 30% area median income, it's really hard for cities to control that type of housing development. So a lot of it's partnering with housing developers or figuring out with them what's going to work in our city.
So the public hearings will, sorry. So the public hearings will be in May and June of 2024.
Of 2023.
But we'll still be working on it in the winter of 2023?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, it'll be late. This was a little bit tighter time frame for us because initially we had thought we were going to be part of the consortium of cities that worked on their housing action plans a couple of years ago. And that was Burien, Kent, Federal, SeaTac, and some of those different cities. And so we opted not to go with that. We did get a grant from Commerce to help us with this work. So that's being used to help for our consultants.
Was that it on the housing action plan? Okay.
Yeah.
Was there any questions, colleagues?
Thanks, Denise. I really appreciate the work getting the grants from Commerce to get this work done and working this into our comp plan. So when we talk about affordable housing, generally speaking, in this housing action plan, is it rent or own? Do you know? Is that broken out at all, whether they're ownership?
Well, we don't have that data right now, but right now most of the affordable housing is at rental rates, for renters versus owners. But I think the consultants will be looking at the broader spectrum of housing within our community.
Okay. And so kind of along that, do we know what our the new developments are categorized as? These, and what I mean by the new developments, there's new are over on 240th, and then just like this new one on 216th. So there's 0 lot line developments, but their ownership, right? Do you know if they fall into 80% AMI or above?
I don't know enough about the Des Moines townhomes, but I do know that like Waterview Crossing, I believe that was 50% area median income. I think Adriana, that was a senior housing, and I want to think that was below 80% area median income. The Point by Vintage, which is a little bit south, is also at an affordability level. I can get those numbers to you, though. And our housing needs assessment also does, they've broken out in a table sort of the total recent construction that we've done that meets the different affordability levels. I think they were still missing some of the King County Housing Authority's housing, so that's some of the information that we've asked them to supplement.
So when we talk about affordable housing, I remember when we were first pitched SKIP, for example, and Patience Malaba and Nancy Backus came, and one of the things they talked about is affordable home ownership, and I think affordable home ownership is not very attended to in this whole conversation regionally, statewide. And so I think one of my questions at several tables has been, how do we incorporate affordable housing connected to home ownership? And so one of the questions this question was a little bit more directed toward the 0 lot line, townhome style development like we did on 216th and also on 240th over by the college, do any developments like that that's home ownership fall under the under 80% AMI category for the purchase? Does anybody have any stats on that?
So just a couple of points.
Yeah.
That would require some research, so I don't think we would have that right now.
No worries.
But a couple of points to make. When you get into 80% of median income, that you're talking pretty responsible professional jobs. Could be firefighters, could be teachers, could be police, could be any number of. So it's important not to kind of have stereotypes, and I'm not saying anyone does, but to have stereotypes as to what constitutes affordable housing. Then the other thing, and the point you make about the zero lot line is important, because if you're going to have ownership, then you're going to subsidize ownership. It's a lot more expensive to subsidize a structure or even an ownership dynamic than it is to subsidize rents. And so most times you see Point by Vintage, you see Waterview Crossing, you see sort of massive high density multifamily, and then they get tax credits for doing that. So there's a way to get from, to get to some level of equality where they can still generate a profit for the development. That's more difficult to do with home ownership. That's one of the reasons it's much more common to see rentals in that. But the other question, we can do some research if you guys want.
It was more of a trivia question, if it had somehow been broken out or if the information was available off the top of your head. But at this point, it's such a long, ongoing conversation, and I think there will be a lot more data that will be generated over the next several years, especially after everybody's done with their 2024 comp plans. So no more research on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise and Michael. Moving on to the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Review and Update.
Okay, thanks Denise again. So we received a non-competitive grant from Department of Commerce for $125,000 to assist us with our 2024 comp plan update. So that update will be due December 31st of 2024, but there is quite a bit of work to be done in advance of that. And so one of the first things that we're working on right now is we're developing sort of the scope of work to do our update by that deadline. And we anticipate using consultant services to support this work as part of the update. And that grant, even though we've been awarded the grant, the mayor received the letter of award, we still have to submit a work program and grant applications. So there'll be a contract that, similar to the Housing Action Plan, that will come before council for approval. But I wanted to give you a heads up on that. And so the comp plan update process, so that's, for us, it'll be like almost 2 years time frame to do the update. And similar to the Housing Action Plan, there'll be a public involvement plan, so there'll be opportunities to get public input throughout the process. And in addition to the general public input, there's a new requirement to collaborate with the tribes, and so that will be a new planning with the tribes will be another component of that. We're really fortunate because of Soundview Park and some of our other relationships with the tribes. We're looking forward to seeing how we can engage with them. Part of the update process is looking at our existing regulations and policies and seeing what needs to be updated based on new state legislation that has been passed. I think the biggest, this one's definitely going to be housing heavy because there's been a lot of legislation impacting housing. So we are going to be looking at that. And one piece of the housing is also this missing middle housing. Commerce did have some grants available for jurisdictions to look at missing middle housing. we didn't really pursue those because we didn't have our housing action plan done yet. But I just learned today from Commerce that they still have money for that. So my hope is that after, if we get far enough along in our housing action plan where we know that we need to think about or do some deeper digging and analysis regarding middle housing, which gets to what you were talking about before, is accessory dwelling units, townhomes, those types of things, where it's not just for affordable housing or housing for low-income households, but it's also housing where maybe you have somebody who's living in a large house that they're downsizing and they want to stay in the communities. So it's also about housing choice too. So that'll be part of it. There's also a requirement about racial equity and providing housing and housing choice, and so we'll be looking at our policies through an equity lens. And then there's some new climate change. I know right now there's no requirements for a climate change element in the comp plan, but that's sort of the direction things are going. So I think that might be a discussion that we want to have as we're delving into the comprehensive plan and seeing where our city wants to go. I anticipate we would want to chat with this committee as well as the Environment Committee and probably council as a whole. Go ahead.
Excuse me. So one thing you guys will be pleased to see, those of you that are able to attend on Tuesday night, one of the stations will be about sustainability and environmental stewardship. And Denise is actually, what a surprise, going to be manning that station. But that sustainability and addressing climate change and other aspects of that, fundamental and a core kind of value and concern for our marina redevelopment. And not the least of which the ferry service we talked about. At some future point, potentially that could be electrified, and we can do a number of different things. So I think we're going to try to stay on top of our game relative to climate change, in addition to components that go into the comp plan.
And we've had staff, primarily it's been Laura Chico, our Planning and Development Services Manager. She's been attending a lot of the climate change discussions that Commerce has been having, and so I'll be able to have her provide some guidance and briefing when that time comes.
I was going to make one comment about the climate change, and since we have quite a bit of coastline here, it was about 3 or 4 years ago we met with the captain of the port, who's in charge of the Coast Guard in the Northwest region, and their big thing now is as they develop things and as they go forward is really hardening relative to climate change. And so I think that's really an important issue. I mean, we hear it a lot now, but I'm not sure that everybody really kind of grasps the gravity of what that means. But the military and as they rebuild through these hurricanes and through all that, they look at the coast and they look at as they rebuild hardening that relative to climate change. So I think it's important. That is probably a more important piece than people realize.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's great.
And I think that really just, I didn't want to go into too much more detail. That just gives you sort of an overview of what's to come. And obviously council, as we have some of the community events and things, we will be sharing the kind of feedback we get from those events, and we'll have a website, and I anticipate we may have a survey as well for our comp plan update, so stay tuned there.
Very good. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues?
Good work. I'm impressed. You mentioned that Laura, going to these commerce conversations. Every time I turn around to, I write a question, oh yeah, Laura's already going to that, or Denise has been at that table already, or I appreciate our attention to that kind of detail in those conversations. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Michael. And Denise. Moving on. PSRC, Transit-Oriented Development Webinar and Walking Tour. And I'll turn it over to Denise.
This is just a brief FYI. Puget Sound Regional Council reached out to us to participate in an upcoming walking tour around the Highline Kent Des Moines Station. And that will be on October 21st from 1:30 to 3:30. And it's a free event, but there is an online registration from Puget Sound Regional Council's website. This is actually really it's intended as a planner workshop, and so any professional planners will get continuing education credit, but they're really looking at innovative techniques, best practices, how to sustain equitable transit communities and that. So we, obviously for some of you who weren't here, we did a pretty elaborate sub-area planning process with Kent back in the 29 through 2010 time frame called Envision Midway, and Kent has been really involved. Well, both of our cities have been very involved prior to Sound Transit starting the development of the light rail station and that. So we've been discussing sort of what the tour route would look like. I know we were going to be talking about access barriers across Pacific Highway South because it's a 6-lane roadway, and just thinking about how people will move from the station area over to Highline College and opportunities for where redevelopment could occur, where TOD will happen first. I think we got the first TOD project, and that was Highline Place, and so we have a second phase that we're waiting for that second phase of development to happen, but also within the city of Kent, I know they're trying to figure out where the focus of that development's going to occur on the Kent side. So we're working on what that tour map will look like, but as soon as we have that information, we'll share that with you. PSRC is really doing all the heavy lifting on this, so we will just have a few people on the ground during the walking tour.
It's interesting PSRC's role in this, but also Sound Transit had contracted with Goldman Sachs to do transit-oriented development around the station. So there's a lot of focus on that effort. But I just wanted to add one thing. So you went to a planning
Directors Conference.
Yeah, and the upshot was that a number of cities want to come here for a tour of what we're doing because Des Moines is doing so much stuff on the planning side. So I thought that was really cool.
And they want to ride the ferry. They were all jazzed about the ferry, and so they were saying, well, we want to ride the ferry and we want to tour. So.
Is it still going to be running by the time the?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, well,
It's a hard stop, October 9th. So we'll see between now and then.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Very good. Anything else?
No, just thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's great. So, and that, to be recognized by your peers is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was here when we went through and did a lot of the transit-oriented development up on the highway, and look forward to diving back into it. And because I know we're probably going to have to change a few things up there again, right? So, anyways, thank you very much. Anything else? All right, motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.